everyone knows that the emperor has no clothes. Everyone knows that those bonds will never pay back the value of the face. In other words, $1,000 paid 30 years from now is not going to have the purchasing power of $1,000 today. And even at a 5% yield, that's not going to make up for the compound inflation rate over 30 years. So everyone's pretending as if these things have value, when in reality, they only have value if you pretend that they have value, because the confidence and trust is there, but it's breaking down.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for Memorial Day through June 2nd, 2025, while supplies last. First this week, we featured 2025 1/10-ounce gold eagles at just $59.99 over melt. Next, backdated 1-ounce silver eagles are just $4.79 over spot. And finally, constitutional 90% silver dimes and quarters are just $1.99 over spot. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty and Finance. And back with us today is our good friend David Morgan from the Morgan Report. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's great to be back with you, Elijah. Thank you.
Well, it's great to have you today. We got quite a few topics to cover today. First and foremost, we just got the news that Florida is making gold and silver legal tender, and that's another state to add to the list that is really recognizing gold and silver as money. Your take on this?
Well, my take, Elijah, and thank you for asking, is really kind of bittersweet. Here's why. It's wonderful that it was signed into law, and I put the announcement from Governor DeSantis into my feed at Twitter or X, and all that is great. However, I also posted my Twitter yesterday a little more details about this bill, and some of them are, well, I'll just leave it to the audience to make up their own mind. But the language was inserted in the bill in the last two iterations, and I think this is done back and forth in the legislature, and it prohibits legal tender coins that display any name, symbol, or marking that could be suggested as an issuance by government. What this means is that while the intent was to prevent deceptive government branding, in other words, someone that takes a silver round and puts, some fictitious country in there, or maybe even a, product of Zimbabwe or something. The idea was, we were told, was to prevent that from happening. But what it really means is that any government-issued silver coin, so think American Silver Eagle, Canadian Maple Leaf, Mexican Libertad, the Euro minted coin, South African silver or gold, Krugerrand, it prevents them from being used, which is the most available, most recognized, most trusted silver and gold coins out there. So the sound money movement fought to have that amended or removed from the legislation, but those efforts were unsuccessful. And so now Texas is thinking of adopting Florida's legislation almost verbatim, which would include the same language, which in my strong opinion should have been eliminated. So thank you for giving me a platform. I wanted to make certain that people in the sound money movement are pro-gold, pro-silver, pro-honest money, libertarian leanings, revising the monetary system, anything I can name, are aware of this. We want sound money to work, but for it to work, it really must be broad-based. And again, I'm not sure the legislature really understood what they were doing. Perhaps they did, but, and it could be, I think in next year, the cycle of legislation, and I'm correct about Florida, I'm not sure that I am, but I believe that a year from now, they might be able to amend it and be more specific, any well-recognized government coins, such as the Silver Liberty, the Canadian Maple, just name them off, will be recognized. Any counterfeit silver round or gold round with, whatever would be eliminated. I think could just change it with just a couple of sentences to be specific that any government minted coins should be used, because this really kind of damps it down from the intent as far as I'm concerned.
Now, in practicality, what do laws like this? I know other countries or other states have had laws like this where you can use gold and silver as money. What does that actually look like maybe on a day-to-day basis for people? It seems like even in those states, I haven't heard about a lot of people actually using gold and silver as money. So how much is this kind of just symbolic, and how much is this actually practical for people to change the way that they do business?
You're just getting better and better and better. I'll just say that out loud. That's the right question. When I was there, when the governor of Utah signed to say something very similar into law, and I made a big, I voiced my opinion strongly behind closed doors and said, this is great, but it's largely symbolic, using your word, because it's not practical. The only way to make it practical is to have perhaps a state depository where if it's inventory and audited on a daily basis or a weekly basis, and you issue, let's say, a debit card, not a credit card, a debit card. It's got collateral. It's got gold and silver behind it. You use something very simple like the closing spot price of silver and gold at the COMEX every day. So if you bought on a Tuesday, the closing price on that Tuesday would be the price, and you would convert it automatically. So, and we have stuff like that, but they're not, they're very few of them available. And that's the only way to really get it into circulation. Now, since that time till now, the Utah people have come up with something that works pretty well, but it is largely symbolic, which is a step in the door. Let's face it, it's better than not having it. As far as practicality is concerned, it really isn't that practical. And another thing which I'll voice, and that is that really the American people are still free to contract, which means, if you're a home builder and I come, and you bid on framing my new house, and I ask you, what, would you be willing to take, 256 ounces of silver to do the framing instead of, whatever the equivalent is in fiat? And you say yes. We've got a deal. I don't have to have any lawmaker give me permission to do that. And so those things happen too. But again, it's, very, very rare that they do take place. So I think Texas is probably one of the leaders here, where they're, using the state depository, to my understanding. But it's got to be simple and it's got to be convenient. I mean, I take a bunch of Silver Eagles into, Walmart in Utah, and I want to buy something, it's just going to stir up a mess. People aren't going to know what it's worth, what's the price, so it's changing, all that. So there are some practical things that have not really been thought through that well. But again, to have it done outlawed, more and more states are following suit on it. Some states are looking at it as, why should we even tax money? Because gold and silver are money. So there are all these questions. The sound money movement, and I'm part of it. We're trying to work through these things. And, one is education, which you've done a great deal with, as you know. And the other one is, well, what's the simplest, easiest, most common sense method to really get traction in this? Because a lot of people want to spend their silver and gold. I will digress for a moment longer. You'll get back to you, Elijah. But James Turk, years ago, after gold mining was really up and running, and I said, the biggest question I get is, a lot of my people, a lot of people that subscribe to the Morning Report, or people that meet me casually, or, ask me questions. How do I sell it? I believe what you're saying, David, and he just smiled at me, said, sell it. They're going to spend it. And at that time in gold money, you could spend it. And that got nixed. So maybe made an over large answer there, but it isn't, it does need to be practical, the way you're going to make silver and gold more important is its use as money. And if it's just okay to use it, as you say, symbolically, it hasn't really changed very much.
Do you anticipate it moving from the state to the federal level in any way here?
That's a real tough one. I would say if you asked me that 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said there's a higher probability than I think there is now. Now, there's others in my peer group that think it's inevitable that unless we go back to some kind of gold tie or gold and silver tie, that the new system won't gain traction. I disagree with them, but it's opinion and opinion. So no one's really better than the other. You can make up your own mind and weigh the facts. But, the one thing that bankers don't want to lose, and that's control. And so as long as they have control of the system and they can dictate what the system is, they remain in control. So if we go to a private-public partnership where the banks aren't involved directly, but indirectly, like say JP Morgan brokerage house issues a digital-backed dollar, but there's no more currency in circulation. In other words, a cashless society where it's digital only, but it's not a bank, it's not the government. The U.S. government didn't issue it. Private corp did. And there's other corps. So Amazon gets into the act, and I don't pick another one, Apple or something. And they all trade, against each other or whatever. But I don't see it now going a step further. And this part does make a lot of sense to me. Jim Sinclair and Bill Holter have said in the past, and I believe I have this fairly accurate, that the first round of the reset will be on a non-backed digital currency, and it will not be adopted fully enough. There'll be too much pushback. Well, they will regroup and issue one that will have a purported tie to gold or maybe a commodity basket. And I certainly didn't rule that out. I think there's thinking on that is sound or correct. But I would question step one, whether or not it will be adopted, because especially if times start to get harder and harder, the universal basic income is just around the corner and people are losing their jobs due to AI replacement and robots are taking over for some manual labor and all that type of thing that we see in the very near future. And people get desperate. They do desperate things. And the way out is to sign up for the new system and maybe get $1,000 bonus if you sign up within the next 30 days or that type of thing. It doesn't have to be 100%. In fact, it may never be 100%. I mean, there's many people worldwide. I forget the number. Elijah, I think it's 1.4 billion people on the planet are unbanked. They still transact with cash or have some app that works similarly, but they don't have a bank account. So, I mean, there are people that exist without a bank, and that will probably always be the case.
You've talked about recently about issues in the Treasury bond market, and I guess that ties in because we're talking about how we might be going into kind of a new system or a system more government that has more government control. And a lot of people have talked about this maybe being a reset that could happen because the current system will get old or really collapse. Your perspective on the latest in the Treasury bond market, how it's kind of showing cracks right now, and no one in the mainstream is talking about this, but it seems like we might actually be seeing right now, and in your words, the calm before the storm.
Yeah, the thing that, I've said it for years, and I probably don't say it often enough, but I think Bill Holter probably says it much more often than me. But, he talks about the credit, everything's based on credit. Really, what he's saying is he's accurate, is that everything revolves around the bond market. The bond market is what I've called the keys to the kingdom. In the monetary world, without a debt-based monetary system, everything is based on trust or confidence. And the confidence is that we've been brainwashed, we, the people of not America, of the world, that the most sacrosanct thing in the monetary world that you can ever have is a government-issued promise to pay, which for a short term is called a T-bill, for a midterm is called a note, and for a long term is called a bond. And they promise to pay you the face value of the bond, which is $1,000, and an interest rate that is proportionate to that bond issuance. So the bond is issued during the ZIRP time, zero interest rate policy, the interest rate is very, very low, but interest rates have been pushed higher. So if you buy a bond today, a long bond is roughly 5%. So let's say you have a bond that was during the zero interest rate period. The only way you can sell that bond is to discount that bond's price from 1,000 to whatever the equivalent is to give that, let's say 0.5% yield, an equivalent yield of 5%, which might be like a 40% discount. So if you had to sell that bond, you'd sell it for $600. Why? Because the buyer of that bond could buy a new bond for 5% yield, still buy your bond at 5% yield because you discounted it that much. Am I making sense so far? Because this is exactly how it works. And so someone says, well, why would someone not just buy a new bond? Well, you might buy a bond that's discounted to the same yield or maybe slightly more because it doesn't have the duration. So instead of having to wait to get the $1,000 for 30 years, we might only have to wait 20 years. So actually there's an incentive to do that. Now, what's the other side of the coin? The other side is I need the money. This is the only asset I have, and I've got to sell it because I got to raise cash. So there's an impetus there. So take that from a micro picture to a macro picture where, let's say, a brokerage house gets a big margin call and they've got to sell what's the most liquid. And of course, that's usually gold. But after that, it's something in the Treasury market, the U.S. Treasury market. It's the biggest in the world and the most trusted. But everyone knows that the emperor has no clothes. Everyone knows that those bonds will never pay back the value of the face. In other words, $1,000 paid 30 years from now is not going to have the purchasing power of $1,000 today. And even at a 5% yield, that's not going to make up for the compound inflation rate over 30 years. So everyone's pretending as if these things have value, when in reality, they only have value if you pretend that they have value, because the confidence and trust is there, but it's breaking down. So that's my main point about what I wrote. And then if you go into the games that are played at the hierarchy of the financial system, there's a lot of ways to buy in the Japanese market for very low interest rates, swap those bonds, the Japanese bonds, into say U.S. bonds at a higher yield, and just play the arbitrage. Buy something for 1% yield, take that and rebuy something with the 5% yield and do nothing. And that's just a nice spread that you get for very low risk. And of course, you mitigate the risk by going to the derivatives market and buying some put options on the bond that you're afraid the spread may come closer. And of course, that's more financial transactions, but it's worth the cost because you're only sacrificing that 4% spread. You're guaranteeing, let's say, a 3.8% spread. And then you do it on leverage. So instead of getting really 3.8%, if you do it at 10% leverage, you're getting 38% leverage, 38%. Well, that's not too bad a deal, right? And this is the kind of games that have been played in the financial system for a very long time. And it cannot sustain itself indefinitely. And the cracks that I'm talking about are in the U.S. market I just described and the Japanese market, really the whole bond market. But primarily, I think it's the yen carry trade coupled with the reality of the U.S. Treasury markets that most dealers that are selling at the more recent auctions, there aren't the buyers there used to be. But there's the Federal Reserve, the buyer of last resort. But that really boils down to a snake eating its own tail. And this is basically where we're at. And I hopefully did it in language that is, everyone understands. It's not really that complex. The elites love to make it complicated, and you don't know what you're doing. And listen to me, you need a broker, and it's hogwash. It's not that complicated, but it's certainly designed with the wording and yield in the inverse, situation where interest rates go up, bond prices go down. People don't understand why and what the discount is, how much, as I explained. So I really appreciate this interview because it's really important that people understand that we're probably closer to a currency crisis that I've talked about for so long. than most people may realize. I think, people that follow Elijah Johnson know, but how many people follow us versus CNBC or MSNBC or, Fox Business or whatever, or even, can't remember his name, the guy that's always wrong. Wow. Anyway.
I think, but to that point of that, a lot of people still are not aware of gold and silver. And getting back to what we talked at the beginning of this interview, is even though this is kind of a symbolic thing that Florida is making gold and silver legal tender and these other states are, it at least gets it in the news, right? It gets people thinking about it. So I think that is a good step forward.
There's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. I forget who I'm quoting. And so we planted the seed. So that's the most important part. Absolutely. You're not going to get a tree to grow if you don't plant the seed. Seeds are being planted. More of them are being planted. And now it's a question of implementation. But, especially if the pressure gets more and more powerful, on the people, what can I do? How can I protect myself? And they realize this. People very inventive, very creative, and they'll come up with ways to make it much more easy to work. And, just because the law says it can't be a government coin, I don't know if people are even going to see that part of it. I'm just doing it because, it was pointed out to me by the group, the Sound Money Movement. And one of the keys there pointed out to me. I would have not known that, to be totally honest. But since I did learn it, I thought it was my duty to post it on X. But you know what? Someone that doesn't read that might just be doing a transaction in Florida right now for, 4 Krugerrands for a down payment on a car. And they both are believing 100% that they're doing the right thing because of the legislation. And unless somebody comes up and checks what kind of coins were slipped between them, it wouldn't make any difference. So, I'm a practical guy, and that's the practicality of it, So, there's a lot to be said, but I just wanted to point out the letter of the law rather than the spirit of the law, because I think there's a bit of a mismatch there.
Moving forward then, for our viewers who I guess are aware of the reality of gold and silver being money, it's kind of funny how, the states don't really even, they just kind of recognize it. They're saying it's now legal tender, but at the end of the day, it is God's money. It is in reality, it always has been money. So for our viewers, I guess, what are your recommendations for them? How do they spread the word on this to really, I guess, help their neighbors, help their friends understand more about gold and silver, being actually money, and that we really need to turn towards gold and silver in these times?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I don't know. It's just something popped in my head. It's probably corny, but I'll say it anyway. I know I can say anything. Maybe there's a, Silver Thursday. Not every Thursday you pay with something in silver, but maybe, once a month or once every 6 months, or maybe once a year even, just as long as, it's a way to educate people, or maybe businesses. I would put it on the people, like if you run a coffee shop that's not a chain, it's independent, you own it, you could discount, and that would be probably one of the best ways I could think of, is that, a latte is what's prices these days. I don't do it very often, 4 fiat, 5 fiat. So you can do it for a dime right now is worth about $3. So fiat. So 1 silver dime is worth about $3 fiat. Well, silver hasn't moved. Yeah, it has. It hasn't moved as much as gold. Anyway, so you put up and your sign is $4 silver is 1 dime. And that's right on your marquee. It shows you what the prices are. I think if a few independent stores did that, I think that would be the best way, because there you're looking at it and you're thinking, well, is that a good deal? A dime sounds pretty cheap. And then someone goes and, calls the coin shop or gets on the internet. How much is a silver dime worth? So, and that was done in the past, by the way. It's still done. It's very, very rare, but you go into some of the rural places, and it's rare. I'm not saying you can find it, but every now and then you'll see, it used to be in gasoline when there were more independents, when the first energy crisis happened. That was the early 70s. But there's still places that will accept it. In Wallace, Idaho, where so much silver came out in the early days. They, for quite some time, and they probably still do it in some stores, they'll do that. You can buy almost anything in the store for silver, and usually it's at a better price than the fiat equivalent.
And if our viewers are interested in learning more about your work, they can go to themorganreport.com. We'll put a link in the description. I know you're very active on YouTube and Twitter, X. Did you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, it's just at silverguru22 on X. And if you go to the main site, themorganreport.com, there's icons for the Twitter feed, the YouTube channel, the LinkedIn presence. So you can just click those icons. You'll be right connected to me. But I just want to mention real briefly, Elijah, that the documentary I've been talking about for so long has been filmed. It's been completely filmed for a long time. The editing process is taking longer than I wanted it to. And I've been telling almost all the times that it should be done by the end of summer. Well, that is not true. The editor is having some health issues. And so I'm probably going to get the hard drive with everything that we've done, which is a vast amount of work, a lot of interviews and film clips and a lot of things. And so I'm going to have to find a new editor probably. And I will. I mean, I persevere. I don't give up easy. But I wanted to voice that because people are saying, what's the story? And this is recent. This is within the last week or so that I learned the situation. And so we will get it done. It's probably not going to be end of summer, but it's not my swan song, but it's probably certainly cost-wise, effort-wise, time-wise, creativity-wise, all those things is probably the biggest effort I'm going to have before, God calls me home. But it's going to take longer. So right now I'm guessing probably September, October, but I want it to be as good as humanly possible. I want it to resonate with people. I want people to understand the power that money has of control of their lives, of their thinking, sometimes even over their well-being. And it doesn't have to be that way, because if you align yourself purposefully and spiritually, you can really overcome that control, because there really is one large and in charge, and it is not the monetary. So I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic. Well, we'll definitely be looking forward to your documentary. David, thank you so much for your time today, and God bless.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty in Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for Memorial Day through June 2nd, 2025, while supplies last. First this week, we featured 2025 1/10-ounce gold eagles at just $59.99 over melt. Next, backdated 1-ounce silver eagles are just $4.79 over spot. And finally, constitutional 90% silver dimes and quarters are just $1.99 over spot. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.